Could you imagine a different way of being that still felt like success without the traditional structures and messages of success?
You have to know what your mission statement is. Who are you serving and what do you value?
Self-abandonment has been typecast as leadership.
The reality is darkness exists in all of us. We are all capable of being vile, evil people because that's a human experience. It's just a matter of what is your relationship to your darkness.
What happens when you master the leadership frameworks taught by Fortune 500 giants and then realize they were never designed for you to win? What if everything you were taught about leadership was actually training you to abandon your sense of self? Could you walk away from the allure of that kind of seeming prestige? Could you imagine a different way of being that still felt like success without the traditional structures and messages of success? My guest today did just that. She learned and succeeded in all of the traditional ways that built her recognition and her credibility. And then she did what I think is one of the most courageous things. She walked away. She dismantled what she had been taught and she rebuilt leadership from lived experience. In this episode, you will learn how to recognize when your success is built on frameworks that were never meant to include you and what it actually takes to create new paradigms and to move from seeking external validation in traditional spaces to building creative liberation on your own terms. This conversation will give you both the language and the permission to lead differently, whether for yourself or for the teams that you lead. Hi, it's Dr. Mira Brancu, and welcome back to The Hard Skills. Today, I'm excited to welcome Dr. CarolLaine Garcia. She is a Dominican-American decolonial researcher, poet, and artist who spent a decade consulting for Fortune 500 companies, including Deloitte, IBM, and Northrop Grumman, before leaving corporate life to answer a different kind of calling. She holds a doctorate in industrial organizational psychology, and she's the creator of Queen Mindset Leadership, based on her combined experiences of training and applying traditional frameworks and later dismantling and rebuilding new frameworks based on lived experience. She's based in Dallas, Texas, where she's a pianist, a painter, collage artist, and founder of Dr. Garcia Brand's Creative Liberation Leadership Studio. So welcome, Dr. CarolLaine.
Thank you so much, Mira. What a wonderful introduction. It's like, we write these things about ourselves. When somebody else says it, you're like, whoa, that's me. So thank you so much.
What?
That with you. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. I invited you after hearing you speak at a panel, and it was so compelling and so different than the way that we normally have these kinds of conversations that I just had to have you on. So let's talk about first your traditional path, right? You spent a decade learning through all your traditional degrees, culminating in a doctorate, and then another decade consulting for Fortune 500 companies. And I'm curious, after all of that, a lot of people would think sunk cost fallacy, right? We put all this time and effort to become the thing we thought we wanted to become. When was the moment where you started realizing, I'm not sure this is right for me?
Oof. I think that message started for me, honestly, in grad school. I've always been a questioner, and my mom has thankfully allowed me to question things, even of our culture or of our religion or of even her own decisions that she's made, and allowed me to sit in the curiosity and in the unknown. I went to get my PhD because I was told to. I only wanted a master's degree, and I had professors that were like, you should get a PhD. And I was like, I'm 19 years old. What problems do I have to solve? My problems are my boyfriend, whatever tiffs are in my family, right? And I applied to the PhD program just because someone suggested that I should. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm smart enough to do this. They're like, you're literally top of the students, always breaking the curves. Why don't you just apply? So when I got into both the master's and the PhD, and I had only ever applied to my alma mater because I didn't want to go anywhere else. And I thought the way the world worked is you just decided what you wanted and then you did it. I didn't know that there were like, I should apply to other schools just in case I didn't get it where I wanted to go. And so when I got into the PhD program, I got a fellowship literally 2 days after I accepted out of nowhere.
Mm.
And throughout the entire process of my doctorate program, I questioned whether I should be there because I was at an R1 university. I didn't do any master's or bachelor's theses. And I didn't even know what STSS was, which was one of the programs we were using at the time. And I felt woefully underqualified to be there, but I was there. And so I think there wasn't a particular point in my career. I think it was always there. And every time I would go to conferences, I would be in classes, I'd always question. And so I entered the workforce with that question, is this for me? And never stopped questioning that.
Yeah. Okay. So you already had this mindset and it was instilled, that critical thinking mindset. And not everybody, I think, is fortunate. I'm going to say fortunate enough to be in that position. When you have a critical mindset, you are able to see things from multiple perspectives. Is this correct? Is this correct? Can I see it from this perspective? Is there another way to think? And so when they go through the same path that you did, which is you're told to go in a direction and you take it, most people don't question. Most people just keep going, right? And they end up hitting a wall, but they don't really necessarily know why they're hitting a wall. And they end up probably pushing and persisting and overdoing and not really wondering, why is this not working? They're just spinning in a cycle. And it sounds like for you, you were able to interrupt the cycle sooner than most.
Yeah, and a big part of that is I've always been extremely sensitive. I didn't know I didn't know highly sensitive was a thing until like 6 years ago when I read the book. And I emigrated from the Dominican Republic when I was 9 or so for the final time. And there was a lot that I was feeling about the experience of switching from, my land to this land, how I'm identified here versus how I was identified there. And then also the relationship dynamic in my family where I came here with some relatives, but not everybody came. So like I was displaced at a young age and had feelings about it and started writing poetry. And in my journal when I was like in third grade, fourth grade, way back in the day when that wasn't as accessible as it is now. And so I think it wasn't just that I was questioning, is that I had a space where my feelings could exist without anybody. I know that there were people that like didn't journal and stuff because like parents would go into their stuff. Like I was given privacy in my thoughts, even if I wasn't asked my thoughts at a young age, but I was given privacy to feel and to experience. And my journals were like the holders where I was consistently seeing, I do not like this. But it's like, as you mentioned, when you get a doctorate, and I was like top of my class, I've always been brilliant in school, but then I got to work and I was like a mediocre performer among high performers. I worked in top tier organizations and I was a high performer compared to the general population, but I wasn't getting promoted as much. I wasn't getting as much of the money. I wasn't being the person that I had always been in academia. And I was like, wait a minute, I've been excellent my whole life. And now all of a sudden I suck. And that's when I started to tune in. Well, my body, my physical body, when I don't want to do something, I cannot force my way to it. And that's when I started to realize that there was another intelligence that was also part of the show. I couldn't just power through it like many people can. I tried.
Yeah, yeah. So again, for you, there was this intuition about what alignment looks like and means. And when you felt it, it was hard to override. And I would say that, again, like a lot of, especially women and people from marginalized backgrounds within this country, especially, are often trained to override their intuition, trained to ignore the misalignments and instead force an alignment with the
Yeah.
messaging that is meant to hold them, a position, a situation that serves others, right? And luck, again, amazing reason for how you were brought up, you were allowed to hold on to that intuition, that gut feeling about what alignment means and not let it go. And so
Yeah.
I'm curious, like in corporate life, what first of all, what kept you there then for 10 years? Like, did you see some success? What did success look like? How did you sort of like continue on? And what was sort of like the pivotal moment for you?
Yeah. So the thing that kept me going is, first of all, I didn't know anybody that had just completely spun out their lives like I did 3 years ago and had done something different. So for a while, it was just like what you see is what your reality is. And I didn't read for a long time after grad school because I was coping with the trauma of a doctorate. Didn't know that there was such a thing. And I just didn't read a lot. So I literally just didn't change my mind for a very long time about what was possible for me. And I thought, okay, well, I got the doctorate and I'm in the stream of corporate life, I have to figure out how to make this fit. And so the way that I kind of circumvented it was I tried a lot of different jobs. I worked in consulting and it gave me the opportunity to try a lot of different jobs. I like to joke that when I was at Deloitte, because I served 23 clients, that I had 23 jobs in 5.5 years, which was actually the reality. We were often expected to activate whatever the proposal was within days of coming onto a client, not even knowing the names of the people you're talking to, the players that are part of the decision-making process, the culture of the space, and immediately expected to activate. They would always call them sprints, but I was sprinting all the time, and I'm like, this is literally unsustainable. And so because I experimented so much, I was able to have more experiences that it didn't give me the depth that a lot of my colleagues had and a lot of my classmates where they were able to specialize. I was always a generalist. And so not only was I generalizing across different projects, but I served so many different types of companies, all industries, including Department of Defense and the military. So it was like, this is an experience that most people will literally not be able to have just because if you worked a job at each of these places, just the hiring process would take up
Mm-hmm.
the amount I was in those organizations. And so there came a point where what I was kind of holding on to, my light in the tunnel was, well, one day I'll get to work in DEI. Because when I was studying my IO psychology degree, D and I wasn't, the E wasn't in there yet, was one of the 20 pillars that we had to like master for our comprehensive exams. And so I was like, at the time, it was kind of known that if you were a minority or a woman or an intersectional body, you were more likely to do D&I work. That was just kind of what the stereotype was. And so I was like, okay, well, I got the PhD. I have all these experiences. I'm a world traveler. I have all these intersections. I'm a shoo-in for DEI. And I kept getting passed over. And people that didn't have the experience, that didn't have the education were like getting into those roles. And it was the first time that I started to see that there was a disconnect between what I wanted and the currents that life was taking me to. And so finally, when I got to work on my first two D&I projects for two major retail organizations within a 6-month period, I was so extraordinarily triggered because essentially we were doing current state assessments, which I would call like trauma collections, right? Like understanding the employee experience of what they were feeling. And I was like, there's no way that I can just collect trauma of marginalized peoples and organizations for the rest of my career. That's the reason I didn't go into therapy, because I don't want to collect people's trauma. That's not how I'm built. I'm literally way too sensitive for that. And so when I hit those projects that I've been working towards, that was 7 years into, post PhD, I was like, well, I don't know what else I'm supposed to do then, because this is the only thing that I was hanging on to. And it's when I started questioning, well, if not this, then maybe it's something entirely different. I don't know what that is. Let me start reading and seeing where my curiosity takes me. And that was what really opened up a whole bunch of other stuff about what was possible with a degree like mine and my experience doing something completely different that I couldn't even imagine at the time.
Yeah, wow. First of all, I'm really resonating with the being a highly sensitive person and not being able to stay within the therapy field. So I really like how you sort of encapsulated it in collecting other people's trauma stories, right? Like that is what you're doing. You're an emotional container for that. You're not completely protected from that by doing consulting or coaching, but it's more like minor up and downs, instead of like the deep highs and deep lows. This comes back to just you knowing yourself well enough to know this is not right for me. And I suspect I know why. And that's okay. Like, it's okay that I'm a highly sensitive person. And maybe you didn't have the words for it back then, but you knew that that wasn't right for you. And there was potentially another path and you started exploring it. Before we go down that path, I'm super curious. You mentioned the trauma of a doctorate. Tell me more about that.
Well, I've just probably in the last 10 years, like, started to process what it's like to have a doctorate when you're like the first in your family. It's not even just the doctorate, it's the PhD specifically, because that's my experience, right? To do something like that before your brain is fully formed. So I entered into my doctorate at 20 years old. And a lot of times, I have, as you probably hear this too, people tell me all the time, oh, I wish I could get a PhD, or I want to get a PhD, blah, blah. And for a while, I would tell people like, I don't think you should. I really don't think that you should get a doctorate. And I was mentoring people. I did my dissertation on mentoring. I was mentoring people out of like their visions and stuff. And I caught myself being like, hey, you really just told one of your students, like, don't get a doctorate. What's going on here? I entered my PhD at 20 years old. I didn't have any problems of the world that I was trying to solve with my doctorate. I just knew that I never wanted to go back to school again. And I figured it was just easier to just get it out of the way. But it was like an entirely practical decision. It wasn't like this thought out, how is this going to transform me? What am I going to do with this thing? I was just like, I want to get this degree, make my family proud, get this money, travel the world. That's happiness. And so in the midst of my doctorate program, I lost a lot of people in my life. I went and engaged. The engagement ended. Both of my fathers, my father and my stepfather, transitioned when I was in my doctorate program, and my grandmother as well, who was my last grandparent. And so it was this kind of like, yay, the biggest achievement of my life, but I have 4 fewer people that were an integral part of my life that are part of that process. And I didn't have space to process that grief because I had to keep going. And then after, it was like, well, I'd already made the achievement, let bygones be bygones, keep going. And I'm like, but I literally lost 4 significant people in my life. And it happened during this PhD that I'm supposed to celebrate. So I didn't want to have a PhD. I didn't want to be called doctor. And then there was also an added layer that my father, he was the first doctor in my lineage. He was a medical doctor, and he was the Dr. Garcia. And I had not forgiven the fact that he had died. So I did not want to be referred to as Dr. Garcia, but that's my name. And so I just was like, whenever people would call me Dr. Garcia, I would literally be like, please call me CarolLaine. I do not want to be called that. And I didn't realize that this was a shared experience of not my experiences, but the difficulty of life still happens during a doctorate. And you have to figure out how to push through because there's no bereavement. There's no like sabbatical. There is like, well, if you don't take your credits in time, if you don't finish your proposal in time, if you don't finish this in time, then the system starts working against you because time is limited, And so it was just like, I did this extraordinary excavation and learning experience before my brain was fully formed. And I didn't even have the language to understand how it had transformed me because I was the only one around me that had. So I think the not having the language part was really a recurring theme in my experience of if I don't have the words to explain it, then I can't understand it myself. And that's why when I started reading, I started to understand myself and my life and these like sensations that I had had because I now could actually articulate it.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. What comes up for me when I hear this is that yet again, our hyperachievement, hyperproductivity focused culture sort of ignores the fact that there's humans producing, right? And those humans need rest and need to grieve and have life events that they need to attend to, but we sort of like ignore it. And, just because you ignore it doesn't mean it goes away. It's still there. So this makes me think of this really powerful quote that I find very profound that you stated, which is, I'm going to just read it. Self-abandonment has been typecast as leadership. And this is kind of what I'm pulling from your theme of like your stories here is around self-abandonment, like how much you're asked to abandon yourself, your needs, your grieving, losses, all of these things. So I'd love to hear more. And actually, there's another piece to this. You mentioned you cannot lead others into wholeness from a self you have abandoned. So tell me more about how you came to that and what does that mean for you?
Yeah. So one of the biggest arcs or achievements of my career that kind of made me be like, all right, I'm good. Like, this is the pinnacle of my corporate career. I can leave now and can be literally just be a basket weaver and be like, I have made my impact. It was a large scale leadership development study that I did at Deloitte that I helped to lead. It was like one of the few projects where my expertise actually was called in to lead a project versus a lot of the work that I did was very junior. Despite my experience, my degree, it was very much what I can see it now as witnessing leadership across all these different faces without having to perform it allowed me to like observe. I'm in the room in the C-suites and I'm walking in. I'm typically the only person that looks like me, but I'm the most educated and typically the tallest as well because I'm 5'10". I would go in with this degree and with this larger body, but knowing no one is being reflected back to me. And I'm also not super experienced because I'm only a few years out of my, doctorate program and being presented, in front of people that are well established in their fields. And I'm like, hey, let me tell you about your boy experience. So when I was working in that project, the theme that we were trying to answer is who is a leader? And it is something that I typically talk when my classmates they're in their classes and stuff. Like I'll do guest lecturing, particularly on that topic. And so what we did was we collated all of the data that we could find from surveys, focus groups, observations, interviews. We interviewed leaders who had 30, 35 years of experience, 100 of them. And I was the one that was meant to identify the themes. And then we wanted to quantify those themes as well so we could have some quantitative data as well. It was the messiest research study I had ever done in my life because they changed the questions halfway through. The interviewer was trained, the note takers weren't trained. I was like, my IO brain was like, oh my God, this is the most. Can we please try something? And they weren't listening to me because they were moving at the speed of light. And so it was this really interesting study because at the same time, they were trying to understand, okay, what do we need to train the next generation of leaders? This is a little bit on the other side of the pandemic. We're seeing all of this massive disruption that the virtual working came on board with. And then well-being is top of the line now. And all of a sudden people are like, oh, you know what matters? Listening and empathy and intuition and creativity. And at the same time, I was in a coaching program that was for all women. And they were talking about this masculine and feminine energy. It was the first time that I'd really studied that. And they were saying feminine energy is like empathy and deep listening and emotional intelligence. And I was like, wait a minute. These are the soft skills that you're saying now, the human capability skills that we're saying we need now because hello, we're not machines, right? But why is gender not in it when we have literally been creating a leadership paradigm around masculine traits, results, actions, money, very task oriented, not very people oriented. And now we're seeing, oh, the people matter. We need to ask people how they're coping with a global pandemic. It's like, yeah, we do need to do that. And so I was like trying to integrate these paradigms that were happening separately, but at the same time for me. And at the same time, the leaders that were on my project were abandoning themselves as if it was their job. And so on one side, we were doing research and saying, we want to create a competency model that puts well-being so that, people can also understand their purpose and take care of people and be inclusive and all of that. And on the other side, I'm seeing leaders that don't rest, that are not taking care of themselves, that are eating on the go. And literally one of my managers, she had this like accident during the project where she passed out from overworking and almost cracked her head open. And what they
Wow.
did is they gave us Apple Watches and took the deadline times off. And I'm like, y'all are not really training leaders to be well-being focused. Why is it that someone like that is so focused on achieving and getting this project done on these deadlines that are literally made up? This is not a life and death situation. Close a random dates, and now we're sprinting towards it. And every time I would be like, can we slow down? can we take time to like evaluate XYZ? Then I would be the problematic one. Now I'm insubordinate. So I started to notice that while I wanted to take care of myself, because I was one of the well-being ambassadors for my teams in the last couple of years, that people just hate taking care of themselves. And they don't know what to do when they just have time, unstructured time. It's like, oh, I get bored. Like, how do you get bored with yourself? There's so much within you. And so I realized that kind of systemically, societally, definitely organizationally, we are not taught how to be with ourselves, not to do, to just be and see what is going on with me. How do I feel? What's in my body? Am I hungry? Do I need to take a nap? And so there was that massive disconnect that I was witnessing. And I was like, I'm not going to be able to last here because my focus on well-being was starting to be seen as insubordination. And I'm like, that's absolutely ridiculous. You're saying you,
Wow.
and then you're telling people to do something else.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. So tell me, what did you do with all of that? All of that information, the energy, learning, where did you take it and how did you know it was the right path?
Remind me, you had asked me the question about abandonment, but then you would ask me a second question and
Yeah.
I don't remember if I
Yeah.
answered it.
So the connected to that, you cannot lead others into wholeness from a self you have abandoned.
So when I first was in that transition of like leaving Deloitte, I'm like, oh, this is like great market research for my business. Like now I know what leadership's issues are because I was also a leadership coach at Deloitte as well. I'd always been a coach of some capacity. We had every organization kind of had their own assessment, like competency model, but my job was to like debrief leaders on what were their areas of opportunity and then what are their strengths and all of that and get them to create a leadership development plan for whatever the next series of, the plan was. And so I was like, oh, this is great research. So now I'm set up to like start my coaching practice. And one of the things that I was noticing that because I finally felt passion for the first time, which I never had, I'm like, okay, because we talk about burnout as in like overworking, but one other version of burnout is your heart is literally not lit. You care about nothing. It's not quite apathy. It's not quite depression. It's just like, maybe it is apathy. It's just like indifferent. You're just going through the motions. And now I was passionate about something, but I noticed that I was now acting like the leaders that I used to work with and was like trending towards burnout within 3 months of leaving my job.
Mm.
And so I was okay, I have to start taking better care of myself. And so I started like adding layers of wellness to my care, like emotional wellness and spiritual wellness and physical wellness. And I'm like, okay, add a walk here, add a meditation here, do a sound bath, and started adding all of these different things. And that's when I started kind of realizing and learning more about myself because I was actually attuning to those parts of myself. So the way that I would conceptualize it now is that there are different data centers that we have access to. And your mind is the one that we are most easily trained on accessing. And so we live in our head. We think that in our head, we can solve all the problems in the world. And for most people, that's what they have access to is that data center. What I was discovering as a way of preventing burnout was that the other data center was like my heart, right? Like emotional intelligence, heart intelligence, all of that has been coming up as a thing, right? There's also soma, somatic intelligence. The body keeps the score that we had been learning in the last 15 or so years is also another important component of the self. And then I was realizing that one of the things that I had finished reading the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And one of the things that he had said is that you should have is a mission statement and a purpose statement and like know what your values are, which is the same stuff that I had done in organizations. And so I was like, wait, isn't that spiritual work? Because it's intangible. It can only come from you and it has to be articulated when it has no articulation to begin with. Why are we acting like knowing self is this woo-woo stuff when it's actually the same thing that every single successful organization has to do?
Interesting.
Purposes. You have to know what your mission statement is. Who are you serving and what do you value? And so I was like, so why don't we tell people that they should know these things about ourselves? And we call it something that only executives should have, but everyone out here is leading themselves, whether chaotically or not, because they don't know where they're going. And so I realized that to me, a leadership is a human, period. It doesn't matter what your title is, because even though I wasn't performing up to their standards at work, I was globetrotting around the world by myself. I was making decisions about who was safe and who wasn't, using my intuition and using my other intelligences. And so body, heart, spirit, and mind, those are the 4 data centers. And if you're not accessing those 4 data centers and you're operating only from your mind or only from intuition or only from, spiritual practices that other people have put on you or only from your spirit, you're not accessing all of you. So your indecisions are incomplete, because if you don't know what your heart says, you cannot teach me how to access mine. You can talk about it theoretically, but you don't know what it's like to actually tap into heart and tap into mind and tap into spirit and then tap into body too. And so I didn't know anybody that was doing any of those at the same time, but I knew people that were leaders in each of those data centers that I was like, oh, how is this person like so in tune with their body? What are they doing? How is this person so in tune with their mind? What are they doing? And I kind of started like emulating people that had mastered those different pieces and reading, supplementing it with reading and just experimenting a lot until eventually, to me, wholeness is all of those data sensors are online and you understand how the past, how history, and how the present is impacting that too, because we can't just leave generational trauma and its impact on your body, on spiritual traumas that many of us have. So I started to kind of like connect all of the systems with the person and be like, oh my gosh, they're part of the same thing. And this is what Eastern thought has been saying for millennia. And that's what I kind of started realizing, oh, there's something missing in the Western world, because the Western world was designed with the mind in mind. And so we're seeing the consequences of that.
Yeah, I have a billion thoughts in my head right now. I have never heard of connecting the mission, vision, values statement to more of like a spiritual framework, and how interesting that is to think about how so many of our companies are spiritually bereft, a bit empty and disconnected from the sort of human experience of their employees, and how empty the most vision, values, and mission statements are. Like they're just wordsmithing the same thing over and over again, but they don't really mean anything. It doesn't give you that deeper meaning of purpose, of something beyond you that you actually want to strive for. And really, that is, what keeps humans going, meaning and purpose. If we don't have that, what is there, right? Like we have depression and learned helplessness then,
Yeah.
right? So really love these connections. And what I'm curious about is, as a decolonial researcher, where does that come in? How do you make those connections?
So when I was reading all of this spiritual stuff, because the impetus for it was my father passed away when I was 21, like I mentioned in my doctorate, and I had already done a ton of healing work and therapy. And I literally went to therapy. I started therapy 7 years ago. And literally in my intake session, I was like, listen, I know I have daddy issues. I am aware and I know how it disrupts my relationships. I didn't know how it was showing up in my friendships yet, but I knew that I had an anxious attachment style. I had learned the language beyond that. And I had learned the word boundaries and realized I had none, because I was so eager to receive that I was like, take whatever you want from me. Just give me, And so when I started, again, language needed to catch up to what the experience was. When I started to catch up to that, I was like, okay, so I have all this spiritual stuff or all of this emotional work that I'm doing. Like my heart data center is being excavated, but what is the meaning behind all of these things? Like, why did my father pass away? What do I do with the fact that he had me at an old age meant that I was going to lose him young? How do I make sense of that? Is there purpose in being born to a father who is going to die before you become an adult? How do I find that? And so that question then took me down the lanes of like studying the maxim of, well, if energy can't be created nor destroyed, then there must be a way for me to connect to him. And I started studying quantum physics and astrophysics to understand energy. And then that took me down the path of understanding like the development of the earth as a whole, and me understanding like how were the systems that we have developed? Because I was also noticing it wasn't enough for me to mindset my way out of the blockages that I was finding. I was realizing that the blockages were specific to identities that I had that had taught me that I was less than. So I'm a woman. I'm less than. I'm a minority, I'm less than. I don't want to get married, I'm less than. I don't want to have kids, I'm less than. And there were all of these. I had learned the word intersection through my DEI work, and I started to realize using AI actually, like I asked the question, how does existing in these identities, if I were to listen to what society says about these identities, what would I think about myself? And it's like, well, it's exactly what I feel, which is I'm worthless. I wish I was a white man. I wish I had not been born in this body. And so I'm already resisting my design. And by resisting my design, then I have no power because I see no power in my design, right? When I started to sit with that, I was like, this is a much deeper work than just mindset. I can't mindset my way out of this. I have to plug into something much bigger than me and ask myself, why was I created in this body? What is the message that I have to share that I can only deliver it in a form like this? What have my identities given me the privilege of experiencing that my PhD can deconstruct? And that was the first time I actually started seeing value in my PhD personally, because it had only ever been used to extract from me. But I was like, well, why did I need, because I could have done this work with a bachelor's degree, like many of my peers were, you know? And so when I finally started going in the community, I started going to like meditations and sound baths and just all of the new age spiritual stuff, just to be like, what's out here? And I also got my yoga teacher certification like almost 10 years ago. And so I knew that yoga was a practice of integration that I didn't experience in the Western world. And I had been studying Buddhism and all religions my entire life because I never really fit into any box. And I think it was the not fitting into any box that made me realize, well, you know where I do fit is the universe, because it is the most expansive thing that there is. And there is space for me to be the entire kaleidoscope of whatever it is that I am. And it doesn't need to be named. And so what that all led to, where I landed at Queen Mindset Leadership, is that I realized that in order for me to love myself so that I could actually live the life that I wanted, whatever that was, is I had to stop thinking like what I see now. I call it king mindset leadership. It's very mind focused, and I needed to lead like a queen. And so I did research on that. And the way that queens led was very community focused. It was very peace focused. It was very witchy. They studied astrology and they revered earth and they did rituals, but they also were very decisive. They built alliances. They built queendoms. And I was like, wait, women have ruled before, and ruled with power that includes everyone. And so it was kind of an experimentation at first. At first, it was just like, oh, this is just great self-care. But where it became interesting, and I'll pause here so that you can kind of go in the direction you want to guide me to, is that there was so much resistance that was happening when I was doing keynotes about Queen Mindset Leadership. Like the people were receiving the message. It was refreshing to them to think about leadership being wellness focused, to think about the self being multidimensional. But it was my client counterparts that were consistently pushing back on me using the word queen to include everyone. And I was like, this is fascinating. And then that took me down a direction of like, what are the systems that are creating that? So it was much the intuition of just when people were resisting, I was like, ooh, there's something here. I just hit something.
Yeah, well, let's keep going with that. What is it that you realized you were hitting on?
So one of the things that I submitted as we were kind of talking about this episode is the idea of racism hides in metaphor. And that is not credit to me. I went to a memoir writing workshop last fall conducted by a creative writing professor from San Francisco who was in Dallas. And he said that. And I was just like, you know, I'm a poet. I'm an artist. I love using metaphor. But he said, basically, when you don't call out the thing gets to keep surviving. And I started to think about how one of the things that we never call out in leadership is how the identities that we hold changes the leadership that we say is good or not. And as long as we keep pulling the human out of what's supposed to be a human paradigm, not just a human in terms of like the insides of it, but nobody walks around looking at my heart. You see my body, you see my height, you see my color, you see my hair, you see my gender, and we make assumptions based off of who that person is based off of that. And so I have the privilege of being the skin color that allows people to receive me without triggering overt racism because I'm mixed race. And so there is a curiosity to looking at me that I have just witnessed my whole life where people kind of like, where are you from? And then my accent can't be identified because I've lived in like 5, 6 different states in the US, and then I'm bilingual too. And so when people just hear a tinge of something, they're always like, where are you from? And that where are you from, that pause is enough to disrupt a stereotype. And so I just get to sort of exist as an uncategorizable human, but a curious, out of it versus being typecast in a bucket and the, categories that go along with that. And so I remember there are two different instances that happened with Queen Mindset Leadership where I was like, I'm hitting against something. One is that I had a client that tried to change the name of Queen Mindset Leadership. So like maybe a year into my keynoting post corporate, I had started the process of trademarking Queen Mindset Leadership just out of curiosity, but like didn't really know what it meant. And so by the time that I had this speech, it was very certain when I talked to a client, like, this is my framework. And if you don't want me to say these words, then do not hire me. So they had brought me along to talk about Queen Mindset Leadership for a Hispanic Heritage Month experience. And they didn't want me to use Queen. And they're like, well, we're going to have allies in the group and we're going to have men in the group. And I'm like, but isn't the mother the one that literally encompasses everything on this planet? What is the issue with being typecast and including in Queen when, I speak a romance language? We use the masculine all the time to represent everyone, and there's no beef. So if it's just about the fact that we're being misgendered, then we should also have beef with being misgendered in the masculine. But the issue is being misgendered when the feminine is being used. And so I literally had to go back and forth with legal and say, they sent me like a tracks changes thing and try to take out Queen and call it mindset leadership. And I'm like, this is an intellectual framework. It's either the whole thing or there's no CarolLaine. And that was the that I was like, oh, I have to defend it. This isn't just like a cute title. This is like, this triggers people because people are questioning, why does Queen Mindset Leadership include everyone? And it's like asking the question, why does Earth include everyone? It just does. The feminine includes everyone. All humans must go through the feminine to get to here. So that was one of the things that was happening. But the other thing is that I was noticing is that because I am a Black presenting woman, but I'm also Dominican and Latina, there was this push to have me talk about my culture while never talking about my race. And one of my clients was like, well, it's very sensitive times. We don't want to talk about race. And I'm like, but I'm not transparent though. Like I'm literally have color on me and my culture is made of a mix of races. And that is part of my heritage. So are you wanting me to take out what my actual culture is because you don't want people to know that I'm not white? Like, what is the issue here? I'm not calling out the people in the audience, but I'm talking about my heritage and the fact that I'm mixed. And so, again, using AI to be like, what is this pattern of stuff that is happening? That's when I finally got to like, oh, this is where systems of oppression live. And this is one of the reasons why DEI doesn't work. It's because it's not actually assessing like the root of the system that we have all internalized. And the best way to know how those systems show up is you just have to look at the top leaders of every company and every country in the world and just do some demographics on who is leading. And does that represent the world? And it does not.
So I'm reflecting on a couple of things at the same time. One is, and tell me if I've got this right, but with the Queen Mindset Leadership, and I was reading this in another book, that it used to be that women were rulers too, right? If not solely in some cultures. And at some point, whether it was, usually a combination of imperialism, colonialism, religious, changes and impact, women were starting to be held back more and more and more until they were basically silenced out of leadership. And yet, here we are trying to bring back exactly the same skills that were there all along, right? The skills of collaborative alliances and peaceful creation of communities and things like that. And just by you bringing that up as a sort of like natural historical thing, you are already facing pushback just on that one thing. And then on top of that, you've got the race and cultural background that sort of it invites people in, but then pushes against what they actually don't want to touch or engage in at all. Is that right?
My brain, but not my body to talk about my brain.
What a what a mind fuck. I mean, really, like in order for you to stay clear and grounded, it takes some effort, and someone like you've already clarified all of this for yourself, but then to not be sucked into the vortex, all of that pretzeling that other people engage in, and still sort of send your messages clearly, I think can be very challenging. I just wonder how do you bring in your PhD training, the rigor of that, to also somehow deconstruct and decolonialize these mindsets that are so prevalent, like where it's in the water.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back real quick to something that you asked me that I didn't answer. I kind of circled around it. I didn't answer directly, but you said something along the lines of like, what does your mean that you decolonized? And I was talking about all those different experiences that I was having in the community. And the reason that those are decolonial is because there was no purpose to them except community, except nature. Like I was learning about my cycle for the first time. I was learning to have a positive relationship with it. Like decolonizing meant that I was now starting to be in relationship with my body, not just my brain. So by virtue of learning to love and care for my body, it's already decolonizing because you're returning to form as intelligence versus just mind. Like a lot of us, we think that we're just machines that just happen to be suspended to a body and we can just like tell our bodies what to do and override it often. And it's much similar to if you have a gas powered car and you never check the gauges and you just get in the car and go wherever you want to go and never look at anything, you're going to blow your engine, pop your tires, run out of gas consistently because you're literally not paying attention to it. And that's how we get in our bodies. We wake up and then we have a to-do list of stuff. And then we get off at the end of the day and we go to sleep, not well, because we're not sleeping well. And then we do it again. And then we're wondering, why am I so exhausted? Why am I so disconnected? Why do I feel shitty? Because you're not looking at your car. Your car's had 3 tires and you just keep driving. So I wanted to answer that part of question because it's where it relates to is I didn't know that all of this stuff was happening. Like when I literally left my job, I was a joy coach. That's the genre that I had chosen of coaching. I never meant to be a liberator, decolonial, nothing. Like I wanted to help people get back in touch with creativity and joy because it's what I wanted. What I was realizing though, this is the really big pivot for me, is when I had my creative awakening. We haven't really talked about like why creativity is the thing that I've kind of anchored on so much. I had done all this reading and I had all this knowledge and I had all this information. And 2 things happened. One of my friends asked me, what are you going to do with all this wisdom that you have? And I kind of got an attitude with him because I was like, why do I have to share any of this? Like, why? This was just for me. And he was like, no, it's not. You read like 300 books. Like, you have to do something with this knowledge. And so then I was like, what am I going to do with this knowledge? What did I learn? How do you process? I had read in a 3-year period, 43 books, 135 books, and 72 books. And there's no one that had read them along with me. And so when ChatGPT came online a couple of years ago, it was the first time that I downloaded my Goodreads. And I was like, okay, I read all these books and these are my identities and I'm on a healing journey. Tell me like the 15 to 20 themes that I would have learned from reading these things. And that was the first time that I discovered, using my qualitative research skills, right? But using AI to expedite it, what have I learned? And then it was like, oh, you're learning about like identity and reclamation and creativity and spirituality and blah, blah. And I was like, oh, because it wasn't like I followed the curriculum. It was very much like bottom up. And so with that information and then all of the writing and stuff that I do, I started to Then my next pivot was I read The Artist's Way. And The Artist's Way told me, you are a creator. You haven't.
Mm. Mm. Mm-hmm.
I love that. The art taught me what are the things that you wanted to do before you became successful, right? And why don't you think that you can do it? And like all of the things that I do now, like the piano, the painting, like the astrophysics, all of that stuff I wanted to do. But I realized that I had a growth mindset when it came to just my career. I knew that I could grow there in my lane, but I had a fixed mindset when it came to everything else, particularly creativity, because I thought that creativity, you're born with it. And if you're not a prodigy, and I had touched the piano a few times and didn't immediately master it. So I was like, okay, well, I guess it's not meant for me. I'm not Mozart.
Interesting.
I shouldn't try anymore without learning before I had learned like what the actual process of mastery is. Requires deliberation and repetition and correction and all of that. I didn't know that. I didn't know how to learn outside of what I had learned because I'd never been taught to. But I had to. And so when I started to see myself as a creative, and then I was like, well, what life would I reimagine? It looked completely like nothing that I was living. I wanted time to just exist. I wanted to draw for the sake of drawing. I wanted to dance for the sake of dancing. And I felt incredibly guilty that I wanted to do something that didn't have any productive value or couldn't be monetized. And that's when I'm like, oh, there's another system there, right? Capitalism is showing up. White supremacy is showing up and telling me that I am not creative. Colonization is showing up and telling me that I am only, who I have been in the US and I have no roots to pull from. And so I had learned these things in like pieces in different books and stuff about the theory of systems of oppression. But now I was realizing how they were showing up in my day-to-day life. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like we think systems of oppression are in some field somewhere, that if we could just find them and burn them down, then we would all be liberated. But we are actually free to create our own reality, and many of us won't because it requires burning down everything. And we don't want that. We want a gentle transformation. We don't want to sit in the ashes and be like, oh my God, what? I walked away from what? Because that's what it is. Like when you walk away from your mind as a leader, it doesn't make any sense. But you're not making sense anymore. You're listening to another intelligence. Another data center is coming online. And it is terrifying because you don't know how to talk to that data center at first.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of what I'm hearing from you also is that leadership is also about being able to know yourself well enough to know which path makes sense and to know what to interrupt and to also be confident in taking courageous steps. And I would say there's not a lot of people that can do that, and I think it is because of what you're saying. There's systems upon systems upon systems set up to keep you small, to keep you with your wings clipped so that you serve someone else's purpose or an organizational purpose or whatever that is, a national purpose, whatever that is. Could you imagine the chaos that would happen if everybody chose their own path?
Yeah. It'd be absolute chaos, collective chaos. And yeah.
And at the same time, great countries, great organizations come from the more abundant, creative grounding, right? When you allow people the ability to speak their mind, to share their concerns, to think of more creative paths, more creative ways to do something, to think expansively instead of from a scarcity mindset where there's only one opportunity for one thing ever. Those are the ones that thrive. Those are the ones that come up with the most innovative solutions. And then the challenge is, once you get to that level, do you then create systems to stop it all, to hold everybody back, or do you allow the continuation of that innovation? I really do think that right now, the ability to tap into and support creativity is one of the most important things that we could do. And even though you've sort of reframed what you do, I still think that the joy coaching, like the tapping into joy and pleasure and ability to have fun, ability to engage in things from curiosity, right? That is liberatory. That is decolonializing, that is all the things that are probably scary to a lot of leaders right now too.
Well, I just recently learned every now and then I'll Google my name, the meaning of my name, the anglicized version of it, CarolLaine. And I had known that there was a version of it that meant like a beautiful wild woman or something. And so that was like really cool to the ego to have that. Recently I re-Googled it and what came up hadn't ever come up before. And it was like the AI generated version. And it said something like CarolLaine means joy and liberation. And I was like, oh,
Oh my gosh.
how cool. And then my mother's name is Mariluz, which means ocean and light. And my father's name is Rafael, which means God has healed. And so that act itself of knowing the spiritual significance of not only my own naming, but the naming of those that brought me into the earth helps me see my birth as like an intentional, purposeful, like plop on the earth. And even the fact that I was born in Dominican Republic and I came here because my lens on colonization is very different because I come from the first colonized island of the West. So that energy, and I have colonial blood in me. I have a part Spanish and Portuguese blood as part of my white lineage. And so I coexist with being both the oppressor and the oppressed, which is a very difficult thing that we struggle with. Like we want to externalize the bad guy and say, well, it exists out there. Darkness exists out there. But the reality is darkness exists in all of us. We are all capable of being real, vile, evil people because that's a human experience. It's just a matter of what is your relationship to your darkness. And so even in yoga, for example, when people say namaste, it typically means they'll typically say the light and love in me sees the light and love in you. I'll say the darkness and hate in me sees the darkness and hate in you because I could be real hateful. It's just that I don't allow that because I operate, my level of interacting with people is I will never dehumanize you. I might stop speaking to you. I might remove you from my space. I might leave something, but I will never dehumanize you as long as I'm aware of what dehumanization is in that, state of being. And so I think generally when I thought about creativity, one of the things that you need space. You think about the actual cosmos, like only 5% of the cosmos is matter and the rest of it is dark matter, which it holds everything together, and dark energy. We don't know what those things are, but 95% of what exists in the cosmos is space. And 95% of what exists in atoms is space. But yet we want to fill our lives with 100% stuff to do all the time. And so what I've noticed is it's not necessarily the practice of, I'm taking a quilting class right now, for example. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's just the fact that, there's stem that's involved in quilting. Like I have to be very precise with the cuts. I have to be very precise with the sewing machine. I have to design something that is cohesive. There's color theory that's in there. That there's technical skill that is in this craft. And by virtue of using my body and my hands in a different way, I have so many epiphanies all the time about stuff, about how I feel, about what I think, about what I want, about what I should do, about what I shouldn't do. And so it's not necessarily about I'm going to be the best quilter in the world, although cool. It's just that the fact of doing something that does not require performance is a meditation that allows you to access a different aspect of you that you cannot access when you're performing, period. And so it's scary to people because they're accessing something that they haven't really been. A lot of us haven't played in such a long time. And we're to be beginners. We're scared to be incompetent. I play lullabies on the piano in performances. And I'm a grown woman, but I'm learning piano. And it means I have to play lullabies as a step to get to mastery. So I think it's just, some leaders have gone in such a deep relationship with their sense of competence that they're unwilling to admit that they don't know much at all, even if they know a lot. And that we as a leader, if you are not willing to be a follower, you are not a good leader, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. I am noticing the time and I know that you have to go get somewhere. So tell me, where do you want to take this to make sure, because we had a lot more questions prepared, but where do you want to take this to make sure that you are sharing what's most important on your mind today? So, what would you like us to focus on just to make sure that I don't miss something that was really important?
Um, I think one of the things that I want to talk about to kind of close everything up is that, I showed you the versions of Queen Mindset Leadership Model and the version that I called like the alternative to it, the mind as the leader and how those other servers, those other data centers are offline. One of the aspects that relates to the indigenous Afro wisdom, the woo-woo is what people call it, is the fact that nature gives us already the rule book for how to be incredibly productive without burning out. Nature gives us the elements that teach us how to change form. Right now, I am exploring the element of fire as an agent of change. And what I realize is that a lot of times there's this maxim in psychology that I've had to debunk, and that is that the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior, right? And if you believe that, then society will never be different and you will never be different, right? Because it's all going to be like on this line. But what I've realized, and this has been the hardest thing to deconstruct because, I'm trained in hierarchical regression where we're trying to find the line that fits data points, right? What we have to realize is that life can be radically different in your life, societally, globally, but it requires that every one of us tunes into the fire within us. We all have something that we're angry about the state of the world. And oftentimes that fire stays within us, or we might share it with people that we're close to, but we don't actually use it to activate change in our lives and outside of our lives. We either focus on all external change systems and policies and all that is good. And you cannot overcome, for example, patriarchal conditioning if you're a woman who never speaks up in your friendships because you've been taught that you have to maintain harmony. Nah, F it. Like, forget harmony. Like, let's talk about truth. If you're stepping on me and it hurts, I am not going to keep your foot on me just because you're comfortable. You're going to move or I'm going to remove myself from the situation. And so I really encourage folks that are listening to think about how their lives are right now. What are the systems that taught them to be that? And AI is just an amazing tool to like help with that. But I also have a ton of blogs on my website that actually already do that work for you. And realize that we are capable of transforming the world, not just changing it, transforming the world. But we have to realize that we have been given the tools to be free. And it's like, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's in the allegory of Plato. I think it's what it's from, where there's like a bunch of people that are in the caves and light is outside and they're not chained anymore, but they are only looking at the cave wall. And so they never want to leave because they think that they're still chained. We are free. You can't out-manifest the system of oppression, but you can certainly inactivate it by speaking up and not staying in situations that require you to abandon yourself. But I will also say a caveat to that is you need to have money to be able to walk away from things that are in alignment. That's why I've been able to, because sometimes it means that you won't get the gigs or the support that you want. And you have to be okay being more in your truth than being more in money. If you have enough money to last you for a while, then start talking back and see what happens. And so all of this stuff, the best way for people to stay engaged with me, Dr. CarolLaine M. Garcia, all of my social medias. I have a newsletter called Cosmic Love Letters where I talk about lunar and solar ways of being that kind of teaches you how to be in circular rhythm and talks about ancestral work and everything that I talk about. But the main thing that I teach is creativity. If you want to do something differently, if life is not how you want it, you have to teach yourself to be different. And creativity is the opening, to it. I've said a whole bunch of things there, but I really want to like emphasize the fact that The ancients have already given us the tools for these times. We have to slow down and use them.
And so I really like that, how you're helping people tap into it in a kind of a different way than we often think about, that you don't have to sort of like attack it from the front. You can attack it from a different sort of connection to yourself that most of us don't. So honestly, I could talk with you forever, but we are going to need to end here. Maybe I'll bring you back. For those of you interested in learning more about Dr. CarolLaine, where can they find you? I see you're on LinkedIn, you're on Instagram. Where else can they find you?
Threads is where I've been getting real spicy lately.
Ah,
There's
okay.
more discourse there around these topics. LinkedIn is, it serves a purpose, but these kinds of discussions aren't it. So Threads is where I live as well. And everything is tagged Dr. CarolLaine M. Garcia. So if you find one, you should be able to kind of ping pong your way to the other ones. But my newsletter, like I said, is going to be the best way to receive all the things, because I'm sort of like reimagining like what my offerings are this year. And I'm very much focused on creativity as the offering. So if you're not interested in creativity, what I've learned is that my work will not resonate because you don't see yourself as an agent of change. I think that is what is required to be an agent of not change, transformation. Destruction is needed for new creation. And if you don't see yourself as a creator for whatever reason, that is something to work on, because you won't be capable of maintaining. This is a long game. And it can't just be destruction. You have to be in joy as well. And that means you have to be well-resourced so that you don't burn out.
Yeah, absolutely. Folks, what did you take away? I bet you took at least one thing away from this discussion. What is one small change that you can implement based on the one thing you took away? And if you want to share it with Dr. CarolLaine, share it on LinkedIn or even Threads, where she's spicy, I hear. Share it with me on LinkedIn as well. If you enjoy this episode, make sure that you subscribe. You know, my love language is referrals, recommendations, and nice reviews. So go to the hard skills. You can check out the new YouTube channel as well. If you're looking for more personalized support around leadership and team coaching, you could head on down to gotowerscope.com. But folks, remember, together, we will navigate the complexities of leadership and emerge stronger on the other side. And I do think that CarolLaine Garcia and me today have really opened up more avenues for you to think about how you can step into that journey. So I want you to really, really think about, what is it that I'm feeling I'm missing, that feels like I'm stuck, that feels like it needs support unlocking through creativity, and reach out to her. Seriously.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Until next time, stay steady, stay present, and keep building those hard skills muscles. Take care, everybody.